Oh, my little clock says 8:01. Okay, can you please call this little clock here? Can you please call the roll? And while we're winding up the Zoom. Go ahead.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Representative Bear,
Here.
Representative Byron,
Here.
Representative Locke, Representative North,
Here.
Representative Oakley.
Here.
Representative Storer,
Representative, she is excused. She's at another committee meeting.
okay.
I think she left votes with you.
Representative Strauss. Here. Representative Swanitzer,
Here.
Chairman Harshman.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have all veterans here, looks like. Everybody knows the rules of the committee. And certainly we have the director of LSO here. Appreciate you being here for this nice little bill. You want to kind of tell us the background on Management Council and maybe the changes that the Senate did?
Mr.
Morning.
Chairman, I will. Good morning, Matt Obrecht, LSO. This bill, Senate File 61, came out of a Management Council study. In January of 2022, Management Council appointed a subcommittee to consider legislative compensation issues. And this kind of piggybacked on work that began actually in 2019, when Management Council did an in-depth study of Wyoming legislator compensation compared to 10 other Western states. And the only legislation that was enacted out of that effort was to have workers' compensation coverage for legislators. This year, the per diem bill came out of that, a legislator health insurance bill, as well as the constituent service allowance increase bill.
How, maybe give us the status of those three, or the two, actually.
Yeah, the health insurance bill failed in committee of the whole in the Senate. And the constituent service allowance failed third reading in the Senate.
Okay, and this one made it out of the Senate.
This one made it out of the Senate.
Yeah, per diem. Okay, very
It sure
good.
did.
And per diem, maybe you want to just, if folks are listening, what is per diem?
Mr. Chairman, per diem is the reimbursement for legislators for their lodging and meal expenses for any official duties undertaken as a legislator when they're away from home on those legislative duties, or when they're otherwise involved with the legislature. So for committee meetings and during the session.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, you want to take us through the bill?
You bet, Mr. Chairman. So what this bill does is amends Wyoming Statute 28.5.101B to increase the per diem amount from its current rate of $109 per day, equal to an amount to be determined on July 1 of each year by the state auditor that is equal to the most recent per diem rates established by the United States General Services Administration for locations within Wyoming. So, Mr. Chairman, this mirrors what you do for your mileage, which is to set it to the federal rate for Wyoming and then adjust it annually. Mr. Chairman, right now, there's the United States General Service Administration sets 3 different rates for per diem in Wyoming. The standard rate, Mr. Chairman, is $157 a day. There is an additional rate for Park County, which is, I got to do the math real quick. $231 per day during the winter. And that goes up to $351 per day during the summer. And then Teton and Sublette County have, theirs is $286 per day during the winter and fall and spring, and it goes up to $462 per day during the summer for Teton and Sublette County. Yeah, I don't even know if that would cover it most of the time. So we'd still have to negotiate with Snow King to try to get a good rate.
Director, when was this 109 established? How long ago?
Mr. Chairman, I'm glad you asked that because I looked last night. 2008
2008.
was when it was increased from $85 per day to 109. And that $85 per day was set in 2002.
All right.
And Mr. Chairman, you'll remember that a bill to increase legislator per diem was enacted or passed both bodies in 2020 and then was vetoed by the governor because of the reduction to Cheyenne legislators' compensation during the session within that bill.
This bill has the same thing. So maybe you want to take us through the section 2 then. And
So, Mr. Chairman, this bill actually doesn't reduce Cheyenne legislator per diem rates.
oh, it doesn't.
No.
Okay.
There was an amendment to
I
do
was
that in the
reading
Senate,
amendments. So they, okay.
but that wasn't passed. The
Okay.
Senate did not adopt that amendment. So,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, section 2 is the appropriations. $125,000 to LSO for the increase in per diem for legislators for the remaining period of the biennium after the effective date of this act, which is July 1. And then $75,000 to the state auditors for the purpose of supplementing the per diem provided to members of any state board or commission whose per diem rates are tied to the legislatures.
I think that's another point, I think, is we're a pretty small player in all this. It's the boards and commissions. And same with our salary, right?
Could you explain that more? Just for
Yeah.
new members.
So Mr. Chairman, maybe I could explain it some too.
Yeah.
By my count, there are 52 boards and commissions who have their per diem. They serve without any compensation, most of these boards and commissions, but their per diem rate is tied to the legislative per diem rate, primarily through one of the overarching controlling statutes through all of Title 33, which is the boards or the occupations title, says that they shall be given per diem in the same rate as legislators, and that's under 33-1-302 that provides that.
Okay. 52 boards and commissions.
52, I think, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. Last count. So section 2B is that $75,000 to the state auditor to provide for boards and commissions that are generally funded, that have their per diem paid through the general fund. C is authorization, spending authorization for those boards and commissions who have non-general fund monies that pay for their per diem. And that would be if licensing fees usually paid for the board and commissions per diem from, say, Board of Psychology.
You know, the breakdown of B and C, kind of the numbers.
No,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know how many of those 52 are generally funded and how many aren't.
Right.
But from the analysis, the budget fiscal division did that 75,000 will be enough to cover those generally funded boards and commissions through the remainder of this biennium.
Excuse me, any questions of the director? Any questions? Okay, well, we appreciate you. And I think you just stay right there. I don't know if we have any public comment on this bill. Okay, seeing none. Is there any public comment online? None online. Okay. Okay, any other final comments? Okay, members, what's your pleasure? Any questions of the director? All right, members. None? Okay. Okay, and will you just stick around if we have questions? We'll as we work through the bill. Okay, members, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Move Senate File 61. Representative Swanitzer. Second by Representative Byron. Okay, Director, you have another point?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, you asked me this, what did the Senate do? And
Yeah.
they did have one small amendment. And that was for fiscal year 24, the bill as originally introduced had a per diem rate of $155 a day. They just changed that to
Right.
to the GSA rate for Wyoming effective July 1 of
Right
this
here,
year.
paragraph B, kind of
Right.
mimic what we do with mileage then.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they just started that a year earlier.
Yeah.
And it would have started anyways under the
Oh,
bill
I see. Yeah, yeah.
because I think it was just an old number that was in the bill, actually.
Mhm. Okay, Representative Oakley. Yeah, go ahead. Oh. What about the effective dates with sitting legislators?
That's great. Yeah, Mr. Chairman. And so what you're asking is this an increase in compensation that would be prohibited by various provisions in the Wyoming State Constitution? Mr. Chairman, it's always been my belief from my research on this, that per diem is not compensation or emolument as defined within the Wyoming Constitution. It's a reimbursement for expenses you incur as your duties. It's not compensation for those duties.
Does the federal government kind of recognize it like that too for tax purposes or?
Mr. Chairman, that's right. It's, except when you are within your tax home, it is not taxable. If you were within 50 miles of your tax home, and that's the section 162H election you all make under the IRS code for your per diem each year.
Right. Okay, very good. Any further questions? Okay. So the bill's been moved and seconded. Okay, members, are there any amendments starting on page 1? Page 2? Okay, and then page 3. Okay. Very good. Okay. No amendments. Question being called. Ms. Jeffrey, please call the roll on Senate File 61.
Representative Bear,
No.
Representative Byron,
Aye.
Representative Locke. Representative Northrup,
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
Aye.
Representative Strock,
No.
Representative Swanitzer, Chairman Harshman. The bill passes 6 ayes, 3 noes.
Stuff. Chairman Dockstetter, Senate Joint Resolution 3. Happy Valentine's Day. Yeah. Okay, welcome to the committee. Okay, take us through your little bill here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We started this up last year. Didn't appear to be enough time to get it through the whole process on both sides, and it received a favorable attention then, and it has received favorable attention in other parts of the building as we bring it to you today, Mr. Chairman and committee. This is a resolution to authorize a property tax exemption for the elderly and the infirm. This is specific to two groups who could use the assistance, people on fixed or limited incomes. These are the same people who are being slammed with escalating property taxes. Infirm meaning not physically or mentally strong, especially through age or illness. With this resolution, Mr. Chairman and committee, the proposal is put on the ballot for consideration. The voting public decides. Then if approved by a majority of electors, the specific legislation can be approved to provide a property tax exemption to preserve home ownership for the elderly and their infirm. Note the importance of may. And again, this is handcrafted legislation, meaning It's not an all-encompassing sweep of exemptions. We've got other legislation out there that takes care of that. What we do here, we can target an amount of people with a limited amount of income or a lack of it that would qualify for the exemption. And that, with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to kind of just walk through the bill, if that'd be okay. Page 1, amending the Constitution by authorizing a homeowner's property tax exemption to the elderly and infirm. Section 1, we put it on the ballot, create a new section 21 submission to the electors, ratified by a majority of the electors. Article 15, section 21, page 2, may be defined through legislation, may be. It's not, we're not forcing anything here. Secretary of State in section 2 shall endorse the following statement. Legislation may provide for a property tax exemption if it determines necessary to preserve home ownership for the elderly and the infirm. Fiscal notes what it costs to put on the ballot. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this sets us up to do the legislation. The legislation can be very specific. It would take and say, these are the people with this limited amount of income. We define that income, and this is who we would assist. It's not a big all-encompassing assistance program. I'm thinking more about when I go down to the senior centers and somebody drove up in an 82 Buick and went in and split their meal up, put part of it in a foam box and wrapped up a roll and a couple of carrot sticks in a napkin, stuffed it in their pocket and took it home because they know how tight it's going to be. We watched this with my own dad. His income was just what it was. It was very limited and kids were sorting it out, how we're going to do it, how we're going to help. And if we would have had these property tax bills that are coming through now, I don't think we would have kept the home. It's insane what's going on out there. We got legislation still in the process that will deal with that. This is very specific. This is just simply asking to put it on the ballot for consideration, allow us to consider a program to address these unsustainable property taxes, and we can find just exactly who and how we help with that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's the resolution.
Okay, members, questions of the good chairman. Hey, just, you know, the devil's in the details on all this,
Sure.
and I think that there's, first of all, elderly, you know, and so I looked up, I just Googled definition elderly, and there were like two definitions. Early elderly is like 65, and then these are my words, later elderly is, 80. So that was that part. And then infirm, sort of definition to what those terms mean, or is that something your intent that future legislatures
Well, we can, but the infirm
would define that? So maybe you help us with that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the infirm, not physically or mentally strong, especially through age or illness. And if we wanted to tag an age on it, we can do that, but that's the reason for this, Mr. Chairman, the specific legislation. Narrow it down, who we're going to do it, what kind of income they have, and not make it all encompassing. I don't want to.
You just said that, and what kind of income we want to have. So you see future legislatures. I mean, your intent is to make this kind of income based, it's not for rich elderly, it's for poor elderly. I mean, that's what it says for the purposes.
Mr. Chairman, 82 Buick, not the private jet parked out west.
Yeah, sure. Okay, members, any questions, comments? Go ahead, Representative Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Docksetter. So I guess my question is on this: to preserve home ownership in Wyoming for the elderly and infirm. When we talk about equal taxation or equal benefit, there's a lot of people who are elderly or infirm who aren't homeowners. And quite honestly, they're in rental properties, though they're having the same effects and issues. I guess my question is, has anybody else brought up that that's a separate class of individual, those who actually own their home versus those who rent or I guess my overall question I'm going to ask is, can a property owner who has an elderly or an infirm tenant, do you anticipate they would be eligible for any type of stipend, support under this, or this would only be if you physically own your own home?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Swaniser. Okay. This was kind of based on what I was seeing and hearing from people out on the west side of the state is we're gonna lose this home. We've been in, mom and dad have been there for 40, 50 years. And there's no way we sort this out. Sort it out so that we can not lose the home. I don't think it's intent, Mr. Chairman, at all to help property owners like who are renting to others. This is to help those who just simply been minding their business, paying their taxes, going to their job, and their world got turned upside down with their property tax notices the last few years, especially the last two. Never seen anything like it. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? So Representative Store?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. President. As we know, certainly in our part of the world, concern over these costs, and we've been looking at a number of different bills to try to address what we see as the real issue. I guess I'm just curious, without definitions for elderly, infirm, or poor, and whether this, looking at the Constitution and the two issues that were talked about in the interim, where Article 15, Section 11 requires uniformity in property assessment, and then Article 16, Section 6, that also has the language that says, that gives kind of that exemption for poor. And I'm just wondering whether this is the right place to put this, or whether this muddies the water a little bit as well in the Constitution, where I'm just concerned that there's conflicting parts of the Constitution if we put this in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Store, it's we're actually working off the Constitution for the poor. Felt like that was an avenue to do it. We want to further define, and not only define what those mean and who qualifies for it. That comes in actual statute. This is just simply a resolution, Mr. Chairman, Representative Store.
Right, but we would put this, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, I would agree with that statement. Well, I'm satisfied. No follow-up.
Any other questions? Representative Locke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How do these people fall into the categories for the property tax refund program? Are they already, is there an issue with their eligibility for that existing program? I'm just kind of curious how they may or may not be covered by that, and if that's been.
Yeah, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman, Representative Locke, that's already defined specifically too, and I do a side note, at least in one of our counties out west. They're not using that like they should, and we had a discussion with our county commissioners, and that is why isn't this happening? Our treasurer, and their proposal was people are embarrassed to come in and ask for it, apply for it, but this actually sets them up to, if we can get this through with following statute, following changing the statute, we can just already do it for them. For whatever reason, that program is not fully utilized, but it's already defined. It doesn't, it's a whole separate issue if they want to apply and get that.
Just a quick, as I listen, this is what I think you're trying to get at. I'm thinking you're trying to get at folks who have been here their whole life, lived in their home 40 years, are poor. Maybe they're on $1,300 Social Security and their property taxes have gone up to a couple hundred a month. And that,
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And we got them all across the state. They've put together retirement, escalating inflation. It's just changed everything. Then along comes a property tax notice. Well, just limited to the west, but we're starting to see that love carried across the state now to other places, and people are, you're hearing from them, they're coming to you and saying, what's this all about?
So you don't, I guess my point is, I mean, if we put some language in an amendment, somebody moves here tomorrow or last year, that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about people who've been here, like your parents, my parents, been here for forever.
Mr. Chairman, correct, just those minding their business, living here in Colorado, enjoying Wyoming.
Okay, then the next little question I had, just, you know, a lot of these studies on property tax, so it's many of the elderly, you know, their homes already paid off, their mortgages paid off. It's this working class people in the middle who have 3 kids and are, you know.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it affects everybody. I think this refund program that I think is gonna, somebody's mic on. Oh, okay, we're getting a little feedback there, but maybe we can turn it down a little, or, okay, but anyway, there's a lot of parts of this. This is pretty broad, I guess, is what I'm saying. So and then my last question really, you know, I think we've got an exemption bill we've passed through. I think it's in the Senate now, $50,000 exemption. Do you need this to do exemptions, do you think?
Mr.
Thank
Chairman, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm setting it up to be something specific may. We're not forcing anybody. It's a may. And then if we need to come back, we could customize legislation that addresses it.
My question, I mean, our tax statutes got, you know, it's this thick of exemptions that we don't tax. And I'm just wondering. But anyway, maybe it's a uniformity piece or something, but okay, Representative Torres question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. President. I perhaps just try to get to my question, see if I can articulate it better. Is yes, I guess my question is, do we need this language in the Constitution? And do we not already have the ability to do this with what exists?
Mr. Chairman, I sense that if we had the ability to do it, we would have done it. And so I'm setting it up saying that we can now. We can go in there and customize it for the elderly. Whether we define that age group. If we need to take it in even deeper and say it's this specific age and this specific income, we can do that through statute.
Okay, go ahead. Morning. Introduce
Good
yourself.
morning. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jeremiah Reeman here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I think the conversation that I've heard so far highlights some of our concerns and the pause that we have with this particular bill. We really have 2 issues that I'll bring to you today. The first is related to the fact that there are no definitions or limiting provisions contained in this legislation. The second, and I'll expand on each of these, is that Wyoming already has an elderly and disabled tax rebate program. So first, starting with the definitions and limitations. One of the reasons that not having constraining provisions in this particular constitutional amendment gives us pause is that, yes, it's a may, but we saw legislation this session, House Bill 215, the property tax exemption for elderly and veterans. It didn't make it anywhere through the process, but that particular bill would have exempted residential property of anyone that was 65 or older who had lived in their residence for 15 plus years. Now, I'll just use my grandmother as an example. She just turned 90 this past July. And she's certainly been in her home for more than 15 years. So for the last 25 years under that bill, she would not have paid a single dollar in property taxes. And she lives on Main Street in Lander, and I guarantee you she's received plenty more than zero worth of benefit from the taxes that are paid in this state. I also think about the uniformity, the quality that we have in our current constitution. And where I live just north of the Capitol here, both my neighbors to the north and the south are over 65. And I think about whether they might be completely exempted from this. Is the exemption 100% or is it something less? That's not defined for us, so it gives us pause as it relates to the legislation. If those things were better defined, I suspect that my members would probably back off and maybe even support this legislation, because I think the intent is good to keep people in their homes, which is the best place for them to be. Absolutely. So I'm willing to work on that. The second part of that, and I mentioned that existing program, it's the Elderly and Disabled Tax Rebate Program through the Wyoming Department of Health. Unfortunately, we haven't supported that program since 2019. But what's nice about that program is that it allows for us to provide tax rebates for everyday expenses. It could be your property taxes. It could be just your everyday water and sewer bill, your trash bill, et cetera. Maybe the provisions of that need to be amended a bit to capture more individuals in it, but it's an existing program that we certainly could look to fund, and maybe even do like we did with the tax refund program, give local governments the ability to offer the same thing if they so wanted to provide that. So again, we have pause with this legislation, but if we can define it a bit better, we might get to a good spot, and we could get behind it and support you in that. And again, I would stand for working with you. And with that, I'd take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Reimer, you mentioned this rebate program being run by DFS and how receivers of this rebate could also use it for other purposes or get a rebate on other taxes. Can you explain that in further detail for me? Just kind of help me with that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Bear, it's a program that when it's funded is available through the Department of Health. And an individual would have to meet certain income requirements. There are certain limitations in there. If you're receiving a refund for your property taxes, you can't receive it for that. Obviously, it would also be limited by the amount that's available in the fund. And it can go towards, again, everyday expenses. So it doesn't just have to be your property taxes. It could be other expenses that you incur. Admittedly, I didn't minister this program. I don't know all the minor details, but I did pull up a flyer on it this morning, and it's rather dated, but there is some information out on the Department of Health's website.
We didn't fund that because frankly, it wasn't as good a program as the one we have funded.
You have
Go ahead.
details on that.
Do you want to add to that? Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Tom Laycock with AARP Wyoming. I am a neighbor of Mr. Reamons, but I'm not the one over 65 that he was referencing. So just I aged well, right? Just a little bit of information on the tax refund for the elderly and disabled. It hasn't been around since about 2015. It was the Department of Health at the time. The program itself would be, you would take your income verification statements to a local senior center. They'd do the verification, send it into the Department of Health. They'd send you back a refund. Now, the refund was usually between about $100 to $800 a year. Okay. And so it was set up for people that made a household income of about $30,000 or less. You guys did fund a little bit of it. I think it was in 2019 or 2018. But the Department of Health at that point said, we don't have the people to run it, so we're not going to run it. They gave it back, the money back, the appropriation back. And I think at the time, Director Noble said we can probably take it at revenue. And so I'm not sure if technically it lives in revenue at this point or not, but like I said, it hasn't been funded to any real extent since 2015.
My recollection is just really we were so broke and we had to pick. And that program was really not seen as the better of the two programs we have out there. And so we went with the one we currently have and yeah. Any other? Okay. Any other, there was just looking at the digest on this bill, there was an amendment proposed to reimburse local government from the state if, any comments on that?
And Mr. Chairman, committee, so the good senator actually introduced this concept. I believe it was last year as well. And I indicated in the Senate Revenue Committee that we actually were somewhat supportive of that particular bill because it contained a couple of things. One, it had a little bit more definition. And two, it contained a provision that required the state to backfill. And that was in the constitutional amendment. So it gave us a lot more certainty that, yeah, we should get behind this. That was stripped out last year. The good senator did attempt to bring that as an amendment to this legislation, and that failed this year as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe a question for either one of you. So the bill before us is talking about an exemption. The current program is a refund program. I'm just curious in terms of like the cost of and how to implement these, how they differ. Because it seems like in order to be exempted, you'd still have to apply for an exemption. I'm just trying to think through whether there's a benefit to approaching this in a different way than we have before. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think Representative Storr, the senator is correct. It really is in how you want to construct this legislation on the back end. You could make it an application process, but you could also set it up such that it's an automatic exemption, which would be taken care of through the assessment process. So that's undefined in this legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question is if it's support for the poor, though, there would have to be some kind of income verification process, either a tax form or something sent in. Would that not be the case?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storr, I assume that's the case, but I don't know that this bill necessarily defines that.
Okay. Thank you.
Else here would like to testify on this bill? Go ahead, Mr. Laycock.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate the bringer of the bill's concept in this. Last year, once again, President Dockser did a nice job in really moving that conversation forward, which helped us get to the point where we funded the property tax relief program. What we like about that is, once again, means tested, because not everyone necessarily needs that relief. We look at this bill as giving you guys the tools, the ability to, go in and make those adjustments when needed. That was part of the conversation last year. Is originally you guys, I think, were working for some more specifics in the bill around the Constitution. And then there was a moment where everyone kind of said, well, if we put this into the Constitution, we have to reopen the Constitution every time it makes sense to move those targets a little bit. And so we appreciate the fact that it's fairly open-ended to the point where you guys get to make the decision when you believe it's appropriate, for whom you believe it's appropriate. But to get back to your earlier question, Representative Storr, we do believe that a means-tested program is probably the best for the state in the name of making sure that we're maintaining county and state revenues.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brian Judkins, I'm the administrator of the Property Tax Division for Department of Revenue. It seems like listening to some of the testimony, there's maybe a little bit of confusion on the property tax refund or property tax relief programs that are currently in statute right now. And if I could walk through them real briefly, Mr. Chairman. So the first one that we administer is a veterans property tax exemption. That's administered through the Department of Revenue. The second property tax relief program is the deferral program. And I believe Senator Dockstetter had mentioned this. This program is administered by the local county governments. We do have a bill out there that wants to change the language for the Department of Revenue to administer this program right now. It is, yes. Yep. Correct. Okay, so the next one is the property tax refund program. Mr. Laycock had just mentioned that. That bill is being testified right across the hall as we speak right now. That has. Correct. $99, correct. That's correct, Mr. Chairman. It's in travel this morning, so. And the next program that is in statute is the homeowner's tax credit that has not been funded for many, many years. And that bill is House Bill 98. And that's still active right now. And the other program that was discussed is the tax rebate to the elderly and disabled program. And that was administered by the Department of Health. And with that, I can stand for any questions. Not that I can think of, Mr. Chairman. Just the deferral program would be, and to my knowledge, Teton County is the only county right now that administers that program.
Representative Oakley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do like the amendment that has been looked at previously that says it says legislature, the state, where the state would pay back the lost revenue to the local government.
That was a amendment that you had in the Senate. And we can get that language to you, but basically.
So I'll just read it, but it's, I
Okay.
mean, it's printed in the, if that's okay, Mr.
Oh,
Mr.
yeah,
Chair.
go ahead.
So what it would be is on page 2, line 10, where that ends, it would add for any property tax year where a property tax exemption is granted under this section, the legislature shall reimburse each local government entity that receives property tax revenue for the amount of property tax revenue that is lost as a result of the property tax exemption under this section. The legislature shall decrease the maximum dollar amount of the reimbursement on a pro rata basis if funds are not available to provide reimbursement as provided in this section. I need all that, but so that's the motion.
Question, is that a separate codified section or do you want to put that in the Constitution of Wyoming? I mean, it's one thing to say, as accompanying this bill, we're going to have a section of law. I'm a little worried if you're putting that language in the Constitution, that ties the hands of some future legislature who may want to. I mean, it limits it, and that worries me a bit. So I'm not sure what the Senate, if that was separate in our statutes or if that was part of the constitutional amendment. I get a question for the committee or the sponsor. And so when we're talking about the legislature may provide for residential property be exempt from taxation, I want to ensure that means property tax. I don't want that. I want to make sure that doesn't mean I want to put an addition on my home if I'm, let's say a wheelchair ramp or something for the elderly or the infirm. Would that be tax exempt as well? And I just want to make sure we're limiting when we say to be exempt from taxation, that we specifically mean just the property taxation that would affect everybody. It doesn't mean any other additional taxations that could be part of.
You're on page 2, line 8.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody can, I know there, that would make me more comfortable if there's any unintendeds on what could be exempt from taxation above and beyond the actual property taxation.
Okay.
I was hoping for discussion, but I guess
Okay,
we could
discussion.
amend it just to make sure it's tight.
Mr. Chair,
Representative Moakley.
I'm just trying to look at the wording. The legislature may provide for an exemption from residential property tax in whole or part. Does that get there, Representative?
It's better.
Representative, should have said the word tax.
The legislature may provide for, and then I would say an exemption from residential property tax, and then just kind of rearranging words, really.
Got really 4 definitions to put in the Constitution, basically, but I think you need a definition of poor. It's, you could put a, poverty level or average wage. I think what elderly means, what does elderly mean? And is it 65 or is it 80? And then I think somehow the intent from the sponsor is elderly who've been here basically their whole life. And that's who I've heard from, frankly. I've heard people call me and say, geez, that'd be something. You've been here, you're 75 and you've lived here 50 years, been in the same house for, so I think that's an issue. And then I think infirm, what does that mean? And then I think this payback piece that you probably can't put in the Constitution, but in some separate codified law. But and those are things I think that I've written notes on anyway,
Well,
but anyway, further discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's at Article 336. It doesn't define what poor is now in the Constitution. It just says you can't give money to any association, corporation, et cetera, except for support of the poor without defining. So I would be a little worried if we define poor in the Constitution as well. And I do think we can codify law to define some of these terms. Infirm does kind of worry me because then, I mean, let's say you're 20 and you want, I mean, are we going to encourage people to buy homes and it's cheaper to buy a home without property tax and paying rent? I just don't want adverse effects, which is what keeps worrying me.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Another fear I have if we begin to go down a specific date for elderlies, I think in all of our communities, we have examples of elderly that have either tried to retire, chose not to retire and continue to work well past some of the days we're talking about. And they're proud of that. And I continue to see, you know, baby boomers specifically that have owned their houses for well over 50 years that retired for about 6 months and then got right back to work. So although I really do recognize the need for that, I agree with the good bringer that there needs to be some leeway here. And just to remind everyone, I think a lot of these questions have referred to this as a bill. And although I'm a freshman, I do want to remind everyone, we have a large hill to still climb to get this anywhere. So this is a joint resolution. You know, we are, this is certainly very, it's a big ask. And like I said, a big lift because it potentially will go into the Constitution, but it is just opening a door and for our future body to do things. So I want to use the word sideboards and think about doing that, but I think that comes with some risk because of where this current piece of legislation will end up as opposed to future law. So just a general thought to share with the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in a lot of ways echoing what the good representative just said, and I think what a lot of us recognize, I mean, it is a different animal than, you know, passing legislation, but the vagueness of it does bother me as far as, I mean, the elderly alone, which we use in other ways, but to be honest, I mean, we're all aware the elderly are by far the biggest asset owners in our state. They're by far the wealthiest group, if you were to make groups. So and I know that then we say support of the poor. Well, and I understand that, but what does that mean? And what it seems to me that, you know, we've talked about this veterans exemptions, refunds, deferrals, rebates, like really getting into the meat of things is how you get there targeted. And I'm just not sure where we're getting with this, to be honest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And really, I'm just asking a general broad question. In the absence of a change to our Constitution, do we believe we lack the ability to support a solution for this group? I'm just asking that more broadly. I mean, I love to hear that discussion and what people's concerns, because as we know, we've had many of these come across. We've created programs, I think, in the absence of making changes to the Constitution. And I have to assume many of these programs that are out there and running were done in the absence of a change to the Constitution. So I'm just trying to understand, is the constitutional change necessary for us to help this group, which I think we probably all perceive as very important?
I asked the good senator as well, do we really need this to do it? And I think that's, you know, a fair question, I think. Rev Zimstor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess that is my concern as well. If you look at statute at 3911-109C, little Roman numeral 2, that's where the language in statute is that describes something that I believe is very similar to what this bill is trying to get at. It's for either elderly or disabled. And it has some income requirements. And I just think it makes more sense for us to try to make that program work better and fund it than it is to put this into the Constitution. I feel like we do have the ability to do that based on the discussion that I've listened to over the last year in interim committee and the materials that have been in front of this committee in the past. I don't see the need for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's a great question, Representative Locke. And I think we need to go back to our state. And as we all know, it is an extremely prideful state. And I recognize your point, but I think that the good bringer, the senator from the south of me mentioned that because a lot of these current programs that Representative Storr just described, and we've all been talking about, require an ounce of swallowing your pride, many people, it is my fear, will not take advantage of them. So I am not saying that this piece that is in front of us right now is the solution to a lot of the things we've discussed, but I do appreciate it in the fact that it does allow for a vehicle in the future to handle some of these issues and leaves the power in future bodies to do such, because I know that there's many people that probably qualify for a lot of those programs, but simply don't think that their privacy respected, et cetera, and they likely won't opt into them. So that's why I think this is an important piece of legislation, important, piece of the potential Constitution to open that avenue, lane, if you will.
I would, I just want to talk to you about an amendment, really, just go after line 10 in the Constitution, and for the purpose of this section 21, right, that we're this proposed new section. For the purpose of this section, elderly means 75 years of age, has been a continuous resident in their home for 40 years. That's my thought on something like that. I think to make it more targeted. And you put that in the Constitution.
And the person has lived like so that.
Been a
we
continuous
don't tie
residence.
40 years it to be poor.
That's just a definition of elderly.
You say live or reside?
Reside, yeah. That's what I'm thinking. I think we got to get our arms around that a little bit.
They move around, they don't want to buy.
And I think that's, I heard the intent of the sponsor. All right, we're just discussing. Nobody's made a motion, so go ahead, Representative Stark. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only thought with that 40 years, say if they did have a home, a big home they had with all their children and went ahead and went to a smaller home, but still are struggling, So that was my only thought. I don't want to leave that 40 years. It's kind of, thank you.
I don't know. Okay. Any other thoughts, folks? Any amendments? Okay, I see no amendments. Question being called.
I think it's going down, right?
I don't, okay, any last chance amendments? Okay, I guess I can make an amendment, Mr. Chairman. I'd move to make an amendment after line 10 on page 2 that we add in this section 1 for the, and we'll get the wording right, but for this definition, elderly means 75 years of age and a 40-year resident of Wyoming. So that doesn't say resident in the same house. And I think that's what we're trying to get at. And that's who I've heard from, in my community. So that's the first part. That'd be like an A underneath there, and we'll get LSO to get all that language, but.
I'll second that.
Okay, second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Um,
Oppose? Okay, that's been adopted. Any other amendments? Okay. Okay. I'm not gonna go down, I'm not gonna define elderly or infirm or any of that. I just, but I think this whole put that one sideboard, and I believe that's your intent, and that's what we talked and, okay. Okay, members, I think we're ready for the question on Senate Joint Resolution 3 as amended, just one little amendment in there.
Ready for the vote?
Please call the roll.
All right. Representative Bear,
No,
Representative Byron,
Aye.
Representative Locke, Representative Northrup.
Aye.
Representative Oakley,
aye.
Representative Storer cast a no vote. Representative Strack,
Aye.
Representative Swanitzer,
No.
Chairman Harshman.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I don't think we've harmed your bill at all. That one helped, I think. So thank you, appreciate it. Okay, members, the committee, I think no other business for the committee today, so we're gonna adjourn and we'll see you all on Thursday. Thank you so much and happy Valentine's Day. Thank you.